Hello everybody, welcome to Aunty Monkey. I'm Andrew Robertson and this is the 9th episode of the Ballooning Podcast. So we're coming up to the Christmas period and hopefully people are going to have some time off. So Adam and I have been recording a whole lot of content and interviews ready for that time, so you've got plenty of things to do and plenty of things to listen to. Today we're going to be talking about competition ballooning. So in previous episodes we've talked about competition ballooning from a pilot's perspective. We've looked at the technology used in competition ballooning, and today we're going to look at it from an official's point of view. My guest today is Claude Weber. Claude is a balloon pilot from Luxembourg, but he's been very active in the official side of competition ballooning for many years. And most recently he's been very involved as a competition director. So Claude has been the director for many European events, and also previously was the director of the World Air Games in Dubai a couple of years ago. And coming up next year in August, he'll be the director of the World Championships in Austria. So in our conversation today, Claude and I look at some of his background, we look at some of the things he does as a championships director, some of the things that happen behind the closed door of the competition centre prior to a balloon briefing. And then we also look at his experiences and the things he's been doing as part of the Ballooning Commission of the FAI, especially involved in the development of the loggers and upcoming logger technology. So hopefully you enjoyed today's episode, and here is my conversation with Claude Weber. Claude Weber, welcome to Aunty Monkey. Thank you very much for joining us on our podcast.
Yeah, thank you very much for having me.
So I've got a hidden agenda with the podcast today. So today, because you're going to be the director of the World Championships, today's for me to get an unfair advantage for the Australians and myself. And we're going to pick your brains and get all your secrets, and maybe I'll post it public.
Yeah, but there might be no secrets at all. Nothing is hidden, nothing is secret. So
great. Well, hopefully we can get into your brain a bit and understand what goes on in the background of the competition director's mind. So before we get into some of that stuff, I'd be really interested to hear a bit about your background and how you got into ballooning. And you've obviously been involved in the sport for quite a while. So if maybe you could just give us a bit of background of yourself and how you got into the sport.
Yeah, well, I came to the sport when I was 17 through family ties, as quite some second-generation balloonists get into it at some point. So I started at 17. I decided I get my pilot license, and 2 years later, there I was, had my license and started flying. Although I had to go outside Luxembourg for university, so that there I had some years where I flew a bit less and then came back, and then there we go. I stayed in Luxembourg since then, and flew regularly.
And I'm quite interested about the Luxembourg side of things, because it's obviously a fairly small country, but it seems to have a very large ballooning population, and especially in competition ballooning. What is the cause of such a popularity of a fairly obscure sport in such a small country?
That's a good question. I don't know why we are kind of I wouldn't say overpopulated, but we have a lot of balloonists compared to the size. And we started in 74, 75 in Luxembourg. And then there we had a few international events, World Championships, European Championships, that were hosted in Luxembourg. And I guess that helped a lot build the community and have more people getting involved. Now we're coming to the second generation balloonists being a lot involved, and so we got lucky having these events, obviously, and also having good maybe financial support from sponsors, which always helps. So the ballooning sport developed very nicely.
And is that
over the years?
Is that similar with other sports and hobbies and things in Luxembourg, or is ballooning kind of a rare thing?
Well, overall, I think ballooning is everywhere marginal sport. It's not something that is overly popular, and everybody wants to do that, like football or tennis or whatever. But I guess, yeah, the conditions were right. So we started very early with ballooning in Luxembourg, and that's how the community grew. On the other hand, we must say we're not that many either. It might look like internationally, it might look like we're very, very active because we get involved in international competitions, both from the side of the competitors and the officials, organizers, and then also from the Ballooning Commission. So that's maybe why Luxembourg as a country, as a ballooning community, is very, very known.
So there's not many of you, but you're everywhere.
Yeah, basically. Yeah.
Excellent. And with your ballooning, I've sort of noticed over some of your photos on Facebook and stuff, you've also been active in things like paragliding and other aviation sports. What are some of your other passions that you are involved in?
Oh, passions, there are many, but it's a question about time. When I studied in Switzerland, which was a great time, and in wintertime you're skiing. In summertime, you have to find something to do in the mountains. So there I went for some paragliding, and I don't do that very much. I don't get the time, especially with family, to do a lot of that. And but at that time, it was great. It was great fun. It was a good pastime of a summer, and that's how I ended up there. Nowadays, ballooning is, I guess, my main hobby. Not only flying, but also directing and organizing and being involved in the Ballooning Commission. So all kind of activities in ballooning sport. But that takes quite some time.
Yep.
And doesn't leave much time aside the family and the job to do other hobbies, or time-consuming hobbies, at least.
You mentioned quite a few different aspects of ballooning that you're involved in, and I do want to dig into quite a few of those. And obviously a lot of that is stemming off your interest for competition ballooning. So you started ballooning quite young. How and when did you start getting into competition ballooning?
As a pilot or as an official?
Well, either. I mean, which one came first?
Yeah. I started off being an observer at Luxembourg National Championships, and then as debriefer and so on. Quite a usual career that you do as an official. Aside from that, I was competing, not much but I was competing in a few championships, twice the Coupe d'Europe in France, and another one in '93. So many years ago. But I realized very quickly that to become a successful competition pilot, you need to practice a lot. By that meaning, you need to fly a lot, simply to get used to it, to get to know your balloon and everything. And I didn't have the time to do that. So most of the competitions that I flew in ended up being very frustrating for me. Because you wouldn't achieve anything, and at least I felt this as being very frustrating, and seeing that I could not afford the time to really practice a lot, to fly a lot, meaning 30, 40, 50 hours a year, and that's something that was not possible for me. Then I kind of swapped to officiating, and nowadays, I mean. Yeah, that takes most of my time in competitions, and well, that's fine.
Yeah, well, and it's one of the interesting things I've noticed that there's in a lot of the competitions that you go to that there are those who are competition pilots that have never gone to the official side, and there's quite many officials that have never actually competed as pilots. So I guess from your aspect, you've kind of done both. And do you think that helps as an official, kind of getting that pilot's perspective, knowing what's happening up in the air and what the pilots are doing from an official standpoint?
Yeah, sure. I think it is. It's absolutely important that as an maybe not all officials, but at least as a director and the directing team, you should be a pilot yourself. Not necessarily having competed or having competed a lot, but definitely I think you need to be a pilot and need to know what it is like flying a balloon, being in the air, and what ballooning is about really from the ballooning side, from the pilot side. I think that is very, very important. And there is actually a rule that says to become or to be director at a world championship, you must be a pilot. So I think that's very important. But then it's generally, I think it's a mindset. Very famous director Masashi Kikuda, who's a good friend, and I learned a lot from him. He once said, "Pilots are not your enemies," and I think that's very important because it's how you see your role up on the stage, directing a competition. Is it you against them? Or is it we're here to run a good competition? And that's what I mean by mindset, how you think about your role. And that's also another very important part, I think, in how you direct and obviously being a pilot.
I remember Masashi saying that very same thing to us because he used to come to Australia quite a lot, and it was very much that often pilots think that the director is out to get you or trying to make things really hard for you for a flight, whereas actually it is the opposite, where from what we understand is you're trying to create a really good, interesting flight for the pilots, something that's achievable, not something that's impossible.
Yeah, exactly. We all want to have challenging tasks. So that's the first goal, I think, of a director, to set challenging tasks. And but if it's too it should not be tasks to frustrate everybody. It should be a task where everybody takes pleasure in flying them and achieves results. I think that officials are there to give results, not to give penalties. To give results and give points, and the best points possible, not the opposite. And absolutely true. You say some from both sides think it's directors, direction, and competitors are opponents, are kind of enemies, and they're absolutely not.
So maybe stepping back, what was the first event that you were the competition director for? Do you remember the first one, your first experience?
Oh, yeah. When was that? That was probably around 2000 or 2001, 2, when we decided to have a small event. We could run a small national championship in Luxembourg, and I decided, let's get this organized. Low budget thing, just a few flights. It doesn't need to be a big thing, but it's all about having good competition. And then we looked for a director and found nobody. And then they said, "How about you?" I said, "Well, I'm not sure. Never done that, but okay, I'll give it a try." So that was fine. That was my first experience. Ran that 3 times in a row, and then at some point through the Luxembourg, or through the balloon trophy at that time, Mobilux, later Lux GSM balloon trophy. I got the chance to also direct it, or assist the director first, and then at some point direct that. And that was my first international event, Cat 1 event, that I was able to run, with all the fears and respect that you can have in front of an international crowd of highly experienced and the best pilots of the world, and
people who potentially know the rule book better than you do.
and you really have a lot of respect. You think, hey, if you do mistakes here, they jump on you.
How did you go for that first international event? Did they jump on you?
No, they didn't. They didn't. I was very happy about it. I had at that time, I think I had Masashi as my deputy, because I said, "Masashi, you need to be there by my side, just in case things go really wrong. But it didn't go wrong. So it's again, I think the attitude was okay. My attitudes and maybe also the friendship I already built in many years towards pilots. It's having officiated before in the same event. I mean, you know quite a few pilots. They know how you work, how you did your work, and what is your mindset and your attitude to the whole thing. And I guess there it helped right from the beginning. That doesn't mean that there were not awkward or difficult situations in any of the competitions, but at least the first ones were very smooth. Pilots, competitors, I think, understood that I was doing this for the first time. It was not about hitting me hard. So it turned out okay.
Excellent. Well, you mentioned Masashi a couple of times. He was obviously a friend and probably a mentor to you. Are there other directors or people, officials that you've worked with over the years that you would sort of see as mentors that have helped you in that journey to get you to the international stage?
Oh, yeah, sure. There are few, and there are quite a few, I would say, and but very few I'd like to mention, because first of all, of course, Masashi, who was many times in Luxembourg, which was my main international event for quite some years, at least at some level of officiating. So he taught me a lot in all aspects. And then there was also in Luxembourg, directing quite a few times, Les Perfield, who became also a great friend and from whom I learned really, really a lot and still do today. I mean, he's still active internationally. He's still active in the Ballooning Commission, and we did quite a few events together and World Air Games preparations and nameless others. So yeah, he was also had quite an influence on me and taught me a lot. And I worked with David Levin, who passed away recently. He was a great friend too, and we spent some very, very good competitions together. I could learn also things from him, not in terms of maybe I directed more or he directed more. I don't know. We didn't count on who directed more before, who has more experience in directing. It's about what can you learn from a person, from his attitude, from his way of doing things and way of thinking. And towards sport, towards task setting, towards competitors and promoting sport and all these things that are actually involved. And so David was definitely a great friend, and we had great exchanges, and I think we learned from each other, which was great. Yeah.
And he was obviously a classic case of a competitor becoming an official. Having been world champion.
Absolutely.
And so since that sort of first international competition, you've mentioned you've done quite a few, especially around Europe. What about from that sort of world side? You've obviously been very active in the World Championships. You've been director of the World Air Games. You know, how does that differ from, say, a European event versus the international side where there's language barriers and things like that?
I've never really faced any language barriers. I'm lucky to speak German, French, and English. So directing around Europe was not that big of a problem. Ran French, German nationals, couple of Swiss and Austrian, and so on. So that was never a problem. Also, I think there's not much difference in terms of running an international world championship or World Air Games compared to European or national championship. The only differences there are is, of course, how the organizer is always different, but that can be from one organizer to another in the same country. And you have to deal a lot with the organizer and adapt and understand the organizer and work with him. It's not working against him again. So there might be some differences. In terms of competitors, I think there is a small difference sometimes in how competitors fly, how they see their flying. For example, and with no offense to anybody, I think, for example, US pilots are a lot more aggressive, not in a negative way, but more aggressive. They're a lot more active and dynamic flying, which is a different style of flying competitions. Mm-hmm. And again, it's not negative against anybody. It's great to see how they fly. For example, they fly a lot more solo than maybe Europeans, and so there are different ways of flying. I think that's the main difference that you can see. Other from that, for me, there's no real difference in running a European or World Championship. It's you're trying to run a good championship, set good tasks. That's about it.
Yeah, I mean, that is an interesting point you made about the different countries having, different styles. I mean, I certainly remember in the Worlds of 2006 where, races were all just starting to become the thing, and there was issues with people really pushing them and scaring. At those days we used to fly with observers, and I think at one point Les Perfield stopped us from taking the observers in the basket because he thought someone was going to get hurt. But we were watching. There were countries there that maybe don't fly around other balloons that much, like some of the Asian countries that were essentially being thrown into the mix with some of these other pilots. So
yeah, well, I just to clarify, I've seen these things, and I've been in competitions where other directors took such decisions as Les took in 2006 and so on. But I don't think that is related to flying. Like I mentioned, the US pilots being maybe more dynamic pilots. That does not mean at all that these pilots fly unsafer. I would even say the opposite. They're being flying solo, maybe being more concentrated because they are alone. So, and then there are obviously from anywhere around the world. And that's nothing to do with nationalities. I think that very often has to do with experience, or overestimating its capabilities of flying a balloon. And these pilots obviously, sometimes cause very difficult situations where others fear while they're flying. But it has definitely nothing to do with the style they're flying in the competition. No, really not.
It's more, as you said, more individual and individual's experience.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, and I guess that's an interesting point I have to sort of ask. I mean, obviously there is, from being a director, there is the pleasure and the fun of setting tasks and watching the people flying into targets, but surely there is that sense of responsibility for safety, whether it's a marginal weather day or, you are seeing things happening that make your skin crawl. How do you manage some of those stresses?
Trying to stay calm. Maybe that's one of my secrets. Trying to stay calm, not getting excited about things, and because when you're calm, you can better think and take better decisions. But it's true that. One of the main stresses is to take fly or not fly decisions in competitions, because it's not a decision. Would I go and fly? Would I send up 1, 2, 3 pilots, experienced pilots? A lot of them more experienced in some conditions or in competition than I am. It's not about sending. Will I send that guy out? Would I send that guy out? But it's about, would you send 80, 100 balloons out? It's a whole different decision to take. So these are the most stressful situations. It's always about the weather, the marginal weather, and whether you can send them out or not. The task works out, doesn't work out. At the end, I was lucky. Most of my tasks usually work out, and some just screw up.
Yep.
That's part of the competition. Sometimes it doesn't work out, and then but safety first, and then it's about weather. It's about taking the decision to make a launch or not, and from where, and which conditions. And so all this around is the most critical, and there you have to stay calm and see all points and get different opinions. That's why you have a deputy and a safety officer and stewards, and you have to rely on their experience and their judgment also. That's why you have to know these guys and trust them, because they will give you advice and their opinion, and you have to know how what these opinions are worth, and then take your decisions.
And this is, I guess, one of the interesting the things I'm very much interested in. I mean, I've been involved somewhat in the background of organising events, but never personally been an official. And there's a lot of things that happen behind the closed door of the competition centre. So I'd be quite interested if you could kind of sort of walk through, I guess, what it looks like on the morning of a competition flight. Like when you get up, what are the things what's happening in the background? What happens behind that closed door before, the briefing room door is open for the pilots and crews to come in?
Yeah. It's, I get up basically 2.5 hours before the briefing time, the official briefing time, which sometimes is very, very early. Then first thing you try to get is an overview of the weather, although very often, and that's also one very important thing, is that you think about the weather and the possible task setting or flight setting in general on the flight before or after the flight, after the previous flight. Meaning that in the evening you just have a thought list or just a short discussion with the weather guy, and he will give you a first appreciation on what it will be in the morning, and then you have you can think a little bit about it. Then in the morning you get up, you verify all this, you get into more details, and while the weather guy is working and maybe does a pieball reading, you start thinking about how can this flight, where can we fly, what can we set. What does this mean what does the weather conditions mean to the task setting in terms of where are we going to fly? So yes, then you think a lot about all this, and you have an idea, draw that up on a sheet of paper, make a very small sketch of what it could look like, before you then put this on the map with the goals you have. And once you have it on the map, you write it down on a task sheet, which I very often do myself, to write it on a task sheet, and then at some point you verify this a couple of times, make it ask for the other officials to read it, to find mistakes, typos, and things you just forgot to put on there. And very often there's combinations of tasks may end up in situations where you haven't thought about it, and then you have to think, okay, what will we give as an answer if somebody asks a question this way, or what can happen if somebody will fly it this way or that way? Is this clear? Is this not clear? Is it understandable? And then about half an hour latest before the briefing, you get this to the printer and the copier, get distributed, and usually I try to open the doors to the briefing room 15 minutes before, to leave enough study time.
Yep.
And that is also a crucial thing, because if you open it 15 minutes before and you give everybody the time to settle, to read this, there are a lot less questions and problems during the briefing. It's the experience I made. So it doesn't always work, because sometimes you're running late. Oh shit, this doesn't work out, and then we have to change this, and the measuring team maybe sometimes goes already early to a target and finds out, oh, yesterday there were no cows, today there are cows. Shit, we have to change something. Yeah. That all happens, not regularly, but it can happen, and then you have to deal with it, and that obviously causes some delays, or weather not being clear, fog. Will it go away? Will it not go away?
And how much research do you do? Like, if you're going to a new area for a competition, how early do you like to get there before the event? Do you like to go and drive around the whole area, looking at all the launch sites and things like that? What's that sort of getting familiar with the area look like for you?
Yeah, depending on the location. Usually, I start working for a world championship, for example. I started working 2.5 or 3 years before the event with the organizer. Then I usually visit the area at some point. If it's not too far away, I try to visit it regularly, and then discuss with the organizer, get a feeling for the area, get a feeling for the different launch sites, and generally for the flying area. And if that is done, which, for example, for the Worlds now, I've been there in August 2016. I've been there obviously for a pre-event run in August 2017. I'll be there again now around the end of the year, just again to make the points and to drive around, check new locations and so on. So if that is done in a good way, then you don't need to be there a week or 2 weeks before the event itself. Sometimes 2-3 days is just enough.
Yep.
And that also is one condition, is that you have an agreement, a trust with the organizer that he's going to set up everything properly. And then there are a few things the officials usually set up, the scoring software, the scoring process, all this stuff. And they usually also come 1 or 2 days before. And that's just if you work with the right people, which I'm very lucky to be able to work with great people, usually in scoring and in measuring and so on. And then you know exactly when they arrive, they need half a day or a day to set everything up. If these preparations are done before. So you don't need to be there 2 weeks before to check everything, because as a director, should not be involved in setting up, I don't know,
putting tents up and marquees.
Putting tents up and exactly. This stuff is just not. It's not what the director should care about. He should care about it. He should not be involved in organizing it. He should care about it because that's also maybe quite unknown. As soon as the director is appointed, usually by the Ballooning Commission, he's also in charge of the overall event and should be kind of somebody who checks on everything. If everything is organized, if the organizer does his job well. If he doesn't, he should talk to the organizer and work with the organizer to get the event as itself, not the competition, the event as itself, set up properly. Yeah. And that's one of the responsibilities of an event director prior to an event.
Well, I guess it's also because the power sort of sits with you, in that you're the one that's determining if people fly or don't fly, and the responsibilities for you. So I guess that's a very important aspect for your own sake.
For my own sake, to get things, but also get things organized, practical things for the competition, but all the other practical things around, and what will a championship make a great event. There are so many things around: media, public relation. How do we deal with public? What are we going to do for the public? Public involvement is very important, and we've seen that in many competitions where when there's, like in Saga, 10,000 or hundreds of thousands of people on the flying goal, that's great for competition. It's not great only for the organizer; it's great for everybody. So you should get involved in this, or check up things and report back to the Ballooning Commission and say, hey, they're doing a great job, or they need more help there, they need a little push here, or things go wrong on this side. That's also your role.
Yeah. And coming back to your task setting and planning, do you, for example, for the Worlds in Austria, I mean, you've obviously had the pre-worlds there. But do you kind of throughout the year start coming up with creative ideas for things you could do during the event and have a bit of a playbook that you can say, right, we've got a southerly, now let's go and play with this combination of tasks?
No. In terms of tasks, no, definitely not. Over the years and the competitions I've run, certainly there are ideas, and sometimes you have new ideas that you see in other competitions, and then but they usually come up at the competition. The task setting comes up the day before, as I said, the evening before. You have an idea, and then you develop that in the morning. It's nothing you prepare and you just take out of the box and say, okay, my goal is to have the maximum number of different tasks from the task book. Try to run them all. It doesn't make any sense. Have a good variety is great, but if it doesn't work out, it doesn't work out. Having a setup in mind, 5 tasks in a row, great setup, great tactics, whatever you like, very challenging. It will not work out. You have to work with the conditions on the spot.
Well, you know the pressure's on now because the Japanese called 7 tasks in a flight the other day, so we're expecting 8 at the Worlds.
No. It doesn't make sense.
No.
Unless, no. I think there is a minimum time you need to fly a task.
Yeah.
And it doesn't make sense to fly tasks in I don't know, 1.5 hours or so. That simply doesn't, in my opinion, doesn't make any sense.
You're busy throwing markers out every side of the basket and pushing buttons and
exactly.
loggers and things.
Everybody wants to throw markers, but not this way.
So here's an interesting question I have for you. You've obviously seen a lot of competitive pilots flying tasks. Are there any sort of standout, not necessarily unsafe, but just stupid mistakes or things that pilots have done that you just had to roll your eyes at? Are there any? You feel free to name, and feel free to name people.
No. It's they're the funny ones are definitely trying to throw a marker as far as possible, turning it like crazy, and then it hits any rope in the basket, or you throw it inside the balloon and it drops out or whatever. It's really bad for the pilot, but it's kind of funny, and I think that's a very stupid mistake. I've done it before. I think many people have done it.
I do it at every event.
Yeah. So it's somehow it's fun to see on the ground, and I know it's not fun for the pilot at that moment because it just loses a lot of points. That's what I call really stupid mistakes, or hitting the ground hard at it because you're not focused, and then you drop into target area, just hit the ground like crazy. I know it's not always a very easy or very safe. It might be awkward situation for the pilot on board in terms of safety. So it's not something I laugh easily about, but some are kind of funny.
Yeah, you know it's coming, and it just happens.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, these are also I think classic mistakes that I don't consider nasty, or I know that you cannot be concentrated all the time, although you should. And these mistakes happen. That's part of ballooning. So on that side. And there are a lot of there are mistakes also on the official side. I wouldn't say they're only on the pilot side. But you asked for the pilots' mistakes.
Well, yeah, that's from a pilot's perspective. I just want to kind of know what my competitors are up to. And I guess looking at competition ballooning as a whole, are there any sort of particular things that you sort of personally wish that would either improve, or there's things that need to change across the board?
Need to change maybe overall. What I've seen over the years is that when GPSs came up quite some years ago, the competitors were a bit unhappy about having too many virtual tasks. That changed back again, and we found balance, where I think there is kind of a balance to find between physical marker dropping tasks and a few virtual ones. So over the past years, I think there are not too many complaints about that. And pilots seem to be happy. So I don't see very much involvement in change and in this direction. But what I hope for, at least, is that we change the way we fly for and with the public. I've been to events where the public has been great. It has been, the show has been great for the public. We've seen it in Saga, and I think most pilots, when they came back, they said this was amazing, flying into this flying goals with the crowd cheering and everything, and having the public being involved, or we showing our sport differently to the public, where this is where we will benefit a lot. In terms of how we can run events, what kind of events, what organizers we can have, and how they set up events and competitions generally. I hear so many complaints about things from the organization side, like food was bad, or sponsorship was lacking here, or whatever. But all this also depends on how you can gather sponsorship, how you can finance such events, and then you need the public. And we as a competition, and really say we, so pilots and direction, need to make a competition attractive to the and great to see and great to follow for everybody, and that we will benefit on both sides, not losing also the interesting tasks or whatever we can do. Obviously, there must be a midway, offering the best possible show for the public. So hopefully, we can improve competitions in that direction in the coming years.
And I think that's obviously, as you said before, where Saga has really got it. I mean, they've got the luxury of, they've got a crowd that's very interested in the sport, but they've also got the venue where you can have a fly into the main field. You can have 100,000 people screaming, yatar, 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 but then you can continue and do another 4 tasks. Then that can be 3D tasks. They can be, pilot declared goals.
Absolutely.
But you've got that thrill of the crowd. And that's quite an interesting point, because I certainly know that, especially in Australia, some of the areas that we're flying, you come into a target and there might be 3 farmers and your crew there clapping for you when you've just dropped a sub-meter result. And you sometimes I wish that was in front of a crowd.
Exactly.
So, no, that's great.
Yeah, it's a lot more fun for everybody.
And so events like, the World Air Games over in Dubai, that must have been a fairly incredible event to be involved in. Sending balloons off amongst skyscrapers and flying out over the ocean and things like that. Can you maybe tell a little bit about that experience and sort of what you had to do differently for such an interesting area?
It was a hell of an experience. It was amazing. I was looking forward to that, and so organizing it was hard work, because it was a completely different set. Set they prepared. It was a different kind of event, a completely different size. Organizer that maybe have our completely different culture. And you had to adapt to that. You had to learn first, how can we deal with this organizer? How can we work together? How and where can you trust him? What does it mean he says this or that? So learning and then working with the organizer was a challenge, but it was great. Learned a lot. I learned a lot myself. Spent quite some meetings, flew quite a few times down to Dubai to prepare this, but it was great, and it ended up, I think, as a pretty okay competition. It was amazing to fly in this area, and that we knew upfront that this was going to be competition where we'll have amazing and memorable flights. And I see these days on Facebook, people still, and every year actually, are sharing this memory from 2015. It was amazing to fly there. It was very different because we had to adapt to other air sports, and they were also flying in the same area. So, I mean, paragliders, they were flying in their area, in their box kind of, and their restricted area, and they would delimit it, and that's fine. But balloons can't do that. They can't fly in a square kilometer area just for competition. So we have to adapt to weather, we have to wind direction, we have to check that. So every time coordinating with our other air sports, that was difficult. And worked out great.
From what I understand, you had to do a few like hare and hounds just to get people to go the right direction. And
yeah, that was. I like hare and hounds, as many pilots know.
Yeah.
Obviously, because I liked. I think it's a good task.
Yep.
It's a target. It's a very flexible task that you can set in many difficult situations also. And obviously, I like flying. So for me, it's great to fly in the air, to get the feeling, to see what's happening. And you can steer your bulk of balloons quite well with this kind of task. And that was the most important thing in Dubai. We had to commit every flight that we were going to fly basically from this side to that side, from this area to that landing point, more or less landing area. This was something we had to commit with the other air sports, which we had a meeting every day coordinating this. And we had very strict time slots for takeoff, for example, on the Palm drop zone. And then obviously fly to an area and say, okay, we have to go here and we have to land there. In the approximate area, because otherwise we get stuck, we get into problems or whatever. And hare and hounds were great to do that. So good excuse for me to get this to get in the air and do some very, very nice balloon flights myself.
Well, and I mean, from the pilot's perspective, I think it's great to bring in the hare and hounds every now and then, because it is the one event you can't overplan. It's the one you don't have to have your head buried in the laptop. It's very much just getting back to the classic flying, and following someone and getting to that target. And I think it's a refreshing thing to do these days. And, to do a different... It used to be the common thing, and now it's kind of the rarity of flying that way.
Yeah. It's not always a guarantee that it works out, because sometimes we're flying over forests and you can't land where you would like to, and all this. So it's never a guarantee that it will work out, but it is generally a flexible task that can save you in situations where you have no clue, or you have difficult weather situation and so on.
And it's a great chance for the pilots to try and beat the director.
Well, I'm always on the spot when I land, so
yes.
easy for me.
Excellent. Okay, so I just want to shift gears a little bit and talk a little bit about your involvement in the CIA, but also just some of the developments around, say, loggers in the sport. There's obviously been in the last... it has been now 20 years, a big shift from observer events to mixed events to logger-only events. And I believe you've been fairly active in the development of what's happening from a logger perspective and the technology side of things.
Yeah. In CIA, so in Ballooning Commission, we started off quite some years ago looking for a logger that was more than just a position logger, a classic GPS. And then one thing that was very important was to get the push button or the marker and the declaration back in. And together with Mark Andre, we set up the actual and still running FAI logger, balloon competition logger project. He was a lot more on the technical side, and he's an absolute expert in electronics and development, and and also he understands very well competition. So that was very good. I was more on the logistical side, concepts of how we can get this done, and it was excellent teamwork, and we still like to work together today. So that was one important way, and I think way of raising acceptance for logger events. Not everywhere in the world, yeah. But generally, I think if we had continued with classic and only virtual things and loggers just hanging up on the balloon in no interaction and so on, we would have lost many pilots on this. And so hopefully this helped making competitions more affordable. That was obviously one concern. And also making it more interesting to fly these tasks, because the pilot is back with a decision to where he gets scored to and what he wants to declare and so on. I don't claim it's all perfect world. It's far from that, but it has improved the GPS or the logger competitions.
I know the CIA does, competition surveys every year, and we all answer whether we like observer events and loggers, etc. Have you seen a shift in the acceptance more recently?
More recently, not. I wouldn't say the focus is not too much on this. It was for some times. It was for some years when we started this project, where really people were unhappy with logger competition. I could read in those surveys and the opinions I was given in person by pilots and in many discussions, is that the actual logger improved the situation.
Yep.
There was kind of a shift there. It didn't go to 100% of all pilots being happy about it, or pilots being happy about everything and all tasks set with these kind of loggers. But it improved the opinion and the way of we flew, and we flew these kind of competitions.
And I've certainly noticed a lot of, in more recent years, the debriefings after events. I mean, 10, 15 years ago, it used to be all, the observers versus loggers discussion for an hour after the event, where everyone's accepted and just sort of are getting on with it. It's I think from a pilot's perspective, I see that the acceptance has started happening and people are just getting on with it. But where do you think it's going to go? I mean, I know there's projects going on at the moment to work out how, we can start doing more things like live tracking from the loggers and being able to have live data being passed. Where's it going, and what projects are you involved in around that?
In the Ballooning Commission, we started with looking at what's next, what will happen next, and we started 2 years ago already, and we're thinking about where do we need to improve, what's the next logger, and we're focusing more and more on a few things. One definitely is developing something, a logger that is in a phone, or at least the phone is your mobile phone is part of it. And there's still options like, do we have the sensors outside, or can we rely on the internal sensors, and so on. So that is still an ongoing discussion, and for sure we need to standardize in world championships and so on. We can't rely on what sensor is built in what phone, for example. So we're heading at the moment toward this kind of loggers, or developing apps. The world turns everything into apps, so it looks like we're doing the same. That's one part, and the app can do whatever we like. Then there is the live thing, which is still possible. It's transmitting. It's a question about transmitting the data to a central place, And mobile phones can do that. So technology is there today. Mm-hmm. It's all about how we gather it and make it work and make the hardware work. It's done by software, so it's all about software. And then we're back to resources to build the software, which is not an easy thing. We all have dreams about how we could have this software, how it should work, and the ideal world is great, but no budget and no resources to program them. Yep. So that's a difficult. So the live thing is a live scoring, live tracking, and scoring. It goes together, but basically all the live, where the scoring, the pilots, and obviously the public takes big advantage out of it, and so that's one other direction. And then we have launched a project with Noosphere. That is a company that is a partner of FAI, a large partner of FAI. They have done a hackathon, and we set them a nice job description that was to develop a marker that you can measure live, so with a sensor in it, that you can have the measurement immediately on the site and transmit it to anywhere. And they're interesting projects being done by students and by Noosphere. So we're still evaluating. We have some very nice results. Depends now on scalability and on budget. You have to put this in place, but that's just one piece of how to get the information on who's on the target, who's closest, and what distance, as quickly as possible to the public.
I can imagine if we've got trackers in markers, then the lost marker fee of $10 is going to go up quite a lot.
Yeah, exactly, exactly. Yeah, because it wouldn't be $10 anymore.
No, it's not just a bag of sand.
But that's yeah. So that's one project too, and it all comes back to the live and to the tracking, but still keeping the interesting marker tasks and obviously involving public a little bit more.
Sure. And I think you mentioned before about everything going to apps and potentially having loggers as mobile apps. And one of the things I've been quite interested about that is I can see that that's going to make competitions a lot more accessible to events. So, for example, in Australia, when we're running an international event, we have to get the FAI loggers shipped out to Australia, and there's a cost involved. Whereas if it's a case of everyone's got the app on their phone, somebody's got the software on their laptop, then suddenly smaller events can run quite sophisticated competitions.
Yeah, exactly. I think that's, again, there we discuss things like, small events can just run the logger of the app and the sensors that are built in every phone. And large events where you have to make sure that everybody has the same quality of signal, world championships and so on, then you might use standardized sensor boxes or connect it to the phones or whatever. So again, you have more options than now, and that's something we're focusing on right now. But not only us, everybody's invited to join the discussion in the FAI Ballooning Commission. It's not a closed club. It's a very open and very open-minded also discussion, and everybody's welcome to give his input and share his opinion in there.
And I was just thinking with the apps, especially at a World Championships, you know that there's going to be certain teams that have the technical skills. They'll probably find some way to get in the phone and reprogram it to give their results a better look.
Sure, one topic to be raised definitely when you develop such things. Definitely. Yep. But it was before. It was when we started off with loggers. That was a discussion. How secure is that data in the logger? Do we hang it up on the balloon? Do we seal it with the tape? Whatever. All these solutions have been there. So the discussion is always there about security and how your data is stored and so on.
So I guess one final thing I just wanted to sort of talk to you about was, we've got the World Championships coming up in August, and that's obviously going to be a fairly major event for you. Are you doing other events leading up to that? Are you involved in some of the other European competitions as well?
Yes, I'm involved in one. That is the Luxembourg Balloon Trophy. That has been run over many years as Mobilux, LuxGSM, whatever, World Balloon Trophy was named, and is now Luxembourg Balloon Trophy. And we ran it under that name 2 years ago, and we'll do it again in 2018 in July. So it's in Luxembourg. It's my ballooning club that organizes it. I'll be running it as a competition director. So yeah, somebody wants to practice. Everybody's welcome. It would be great to have very good pilots coming and join us.
And what time of year is that?
That's in July. It's mid of July, and lbt.lu, everything will be announced there.
We have to extend our trip to Austria by an extra month to come to that event as well, do we?
Yeah, maybe, yes, absolutely.
Oh,
it's always worth coming to Europe, you see.
Well, if we're shipping our gear over there, we may as well come for a long period of time to justify the cost.
It's your winter time anyway, so.
Well, that's all right. We'll have to see what work says about that.
Yeah. No, but everybody's welcome. We'll be we're heading to be a Cat 1 event, so we will apply for that, and so it will be a nice event with about 40 around 40 balloons that we can accept.
Fantastic. So, final question for you: after the Worlds, what's the future look like for you? Have you got other things that you're going to try and do in ballooning and other areas, or is this sort of, what you've decided that this is your speciality that you're going to do for life is competition directors? Sure. Yeah, sure. Not for life. I do it as long as I like it and people like it. People like my work, obviously. It's my first World Championship. So looking forward to that. Afterwards, I don't know yet. There are some interesting discussions going on with some organizers, but that's obviously always on the officiating side in terms of directing and being involved and so on. So for the moment, we'll still have fun doing that. As I said, as long as it is appreciated, and I get invited, why not? We'll see what happens after that. With the family, my kids growing up, I want to get to fly also in Luxembourg myself a little bit more, maybe get the kids involved. That would be great. They're still quite young. Will they become competition pilots and you'll be their coach?
I have no idea. I don't know if I will be a good coach for a competition pilot, but they are. If they want to take the step and become a pilot, I will certainly support them. But as I said, they are 2 and 5 years old, 2 boys, so quite some time to go. But I will try to get them involved, obviously, as I have been involved in ballooning, coming from the family. Yeah, it was the family that got me involved, so I will do the same for them if they like. And then we'll see. Get involved in more or less in ballooning commission. That depends on what I can do, where I can help, and what is appreciated. It's not that I really want to do something just because I want it. It's how can I help? And if it helps, if it's appreciated, I will continue to do that. For now.
Well, fantastic. It is definitely appreciated, the feedback, and when I've seen you up on the stage as either an assistant director or being an official, we certainly like your work, so thank you for that.
Thank you very much.
And certainly I hope to catch up. I know we're all going to be busy at the Worlds, but hopefully after the event we can maybe catch a beer at the after party. There's always
time for a beer.
That's right. But certainly afterwards maybe we could even do a follow-up podcast and have the debrief as a podcast. Yeah. Or we'll do a live one with you.
Excellent idea.
Fantastic. Well, thank you very much for your time today, and thank you for joining the Aunty Monkey podcast. You. Great.
It was a pleasure. Thank you very much.
Hi, it's Andrew here again. Just a quick reminder, please get out there and share Aunty Monkey on Facebook. The more support we get from you guys to share the content and get more people listening to the podcast, the better. Also, if you have any suggestions of people that we could include on episodes, please let us know. You can contact us through auntymonkey.com. There's links to our email or the Facebook page.